Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Between Ukraine and Russia.
And the Crimean Peninsula have emerged as the most strategic and mobile front lines of the war. The Ukrainian armed forces have concentrated their efforts on disabling the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. This has allowed them to continue offensive maneuvers in Zaporizhia, move towards Crimea, and disrupt Russian logistics in southern Ukraine. As part of this effort, a Ukrainian unmanned seaplane notably shot down and sank the Russian Olenogorsk-Gornyak, Oropetcha-class amphibious ship. In a subsequent operation near the Azov coast, Ukrainian special forces sank Russian tanker ships, once again deploying unmanned seaplanes. These significant actions caused Russia to hesitate in deploying its navy forces from the Black Sea to the Ukrainian coastline. This hesitation arose after Ukraine declared that all Russian-flagged ships off the Black Sea would be targets, following any threats from Russia in the Black Sea or Crimea. These events mark the beginning of historic measures taken by the Ukrainians to undermine Moscow's military logistics in southern Ukraine, all in line with Kiev's major offensive strategies. Recent events include the Ukrainian armed forces launching unexpected missile attacks on two critical bridges, significantly crippling Russian logistics both on the southern front lines and in Crimea. The sudden attacks on these bridges caught the Russians off guard, with the second bridge's destruction entirely collapsing Russian logistics lines. The simultaneous assaults, occurring within 24 hours, demonstrate Kiev's proximity to its goal of liberating Crimea. The details of these astonishing offensive operations include two major bridge strikes. The first targeted the Chongar Bridge, which had previously been hit by Storm Shadow missiles on June 22, 2023. The Ukrainians launched a severe missile attack on the bridge using British long-range Storm Shadow missiles, despite Russian claims that Scalp EG missiles were used. Vladimir Saldo, the Russian-appointed governor of the Kherson Oblast, confirmed that the Ukrainian armed forces heavily damaged the Chongar Bridge with Storm Shadow missiles. Photos of the damage went viral on social media, showcasing a massive breach in the bridge's path. Although evidence pointed to the use of long-range missiles, it remained unclear whether these were Storm Shadows or Scalps. Due to the damage, transportation at the Chongar checkpoint has been temporarily halted, and the nearby Chorna Bridge is closed to passenger traffic. Sergei Aksyonov, the Russian-appointed governor of occupied Crimea, offered further insights, confirming the bridge's damage while claiming that only one missile had struck. The importance of the Chongar Bridge, used for transporting ammunition and fuel, cannot be understated. It has been vital for Russian logistics since its last bombing on 22 June. However, Ukraine's recent missile strikes have effectively severed Russia's supply lines in Crimea and southern Ukraine. This has forced Russia to devise longer connection routes for military shipments, a task that must be accomplished before recovery from this considerable setback can begin. The Ukrainian armed forces targeted another bridge line utilized by Putin's troops on the southern Ukrainian front lines. They launched an attack on the bridge over the Tunka Strait, linking the town of Henetchesk in the Kherson region to Arabat-Spit. Vladimir Saldo, the Russian-appointed governor of Kherson Oblast, announced this striking assault. He stated that Russian air defenses intercepted 9 of the 12 missiles. Representatives of the Russian occupation authorities in Ukrainian regions reported this data. However, there has been no official acknowledgement of the Ukrainian armed forces' attack on the Henetchesk bridge. Subsequent to the missile strikes, it was found that the bridge to Arabat-Spit near Henetchesk, along with a nearby gas pipeline, was damaged, leaving 20,000 city residents without power. Authorities closed the bridge to civilians and evacuated many from the vicinity. Images of the damaged bridge were also shared on social media, showing significant destruction and indicating that the Russians could no longer utilize this vital logistical route. Essentially, the Ukrainians altered the course of the war between the southern front lines and Crimea in a single day by demolishing two primary bridges used by the Russians for military transport. These assaults on key communication lines on land could pose severe logistical challenges for Russian forces in southern Ukraine, potentially aiding the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the Zaporizhia Oblast. So, what will this mean for the Russians in the vital areas between southern Ukraine and Crimea? There are 3 major vehicular bridges and 2 railway bridges that connect Crimea to the Ukrainian mainland across 3 zones. The isthmus near Armyansk, with bridges over the North Crimean Canal, is about 75 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled regions in Kherson Oblast, making it susceptible to missile attacks. As a result, the Ukrainians are likely to press forward from the southern front lines to Crimea with HIMARS, Scalp, and Storm Shadow missile strikes, having impeded the Russian troops' access to bridges in Chonga and Heroisk. Clashes in southern Ukraine intensified sharply after these bridge assaults. The Ukrainian army continues to assail the Melitopol and Berdyansk sectors of the Zaporizhia region, consolidates the lines they have reached, and implements counter-battery tactics. The Russians also acted to thwart the Ukrainian advancement in Zaporizhia and to protect Crimea from the Zaporizhia direction. They undertook unsuccessful offensive measures in the Robertina region of Zaporizhia. Russian forces carried out air raids near Huliaopol, Malotokmak, and Orikhiv, and shelled more than 10 locations, including Novogeorgievka, Lavagna, Komishuvaka, Orikhiv, Pyatakotki in Zaporizhia, and Nikopol in Dnipropetrovsk. These Russian offensives, however, were fruitless. In contrast, Russian troops initiated an air raid near Ojodikami in Kherson. Over 10 Kherson settlements, such as Olkovka, Sadover, Kherson, and Kisamos, were bombarded by the Russians. When these maneuvers proved ineffective, the Ukrainians launched a counteroffensive. They subsequently destroyed an entire Russian missile unit on Kherson's left bank and detonated 5 Russian artillery pieces in a radar station at their firing location in Kherson. Kirilo Budanov, the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Chief, stated that the Ukrainian counter-assault was impeded by the Russians' intricate defensive structures, but that the Ukrainian forces would persist in advancing towards Crimea. In conclusion, the Ukrainian armed forces have begun to more distinctly illustrate their determination to attain their primary objectives by dismantling the Russian logistical routes in Kherson and Crimea. Russia's aggressive actions in Eastern Europe and China's in the Pacific are compelling the United States and its allies to take drastic action. Recent Taiwan-related tensions in the South China Sea have prompted the United States and the United Kingdom to tighten their measures in Europe, the Pacific, and the Baltics. While experts stress the dangers of Russian aggression against the Baltic and Scandinavian states, NATO superpowers are transforming the Ukrainian army into the most formidable in the world. Escalations in Crimea and the Black Sea, the Gulf of Finland in the Baltics, and the Taiwan Strait in the Pacific are the most important links in the sequence of events that could upset the global balance of power in these regions. U.S. allies and Russia encounter one another. Currently, among these regions, only Crimea directly affects and concerns Vladimir Putin. Crimea is the legitimate territory of Ukraine, but it has been annexed by Russia for 9 years. In recent months, Ukraine's pressure on Crimea has increased, and Ukrainian allies are making every effort to bolster this pressure. Recently, tensions have been escalating in Crimea. Crimea is internationally recognized as Ukrainian territory, and Ukrainian forces are refocusing their attacks on the region to assert their legal claim. Frequently, drone and missile attacks shock the historic peninsula. In recent weeks, Crimea has been the target of numerous attacks, including multiple drone attacks on the region's main city, Sevastopol. As the leader of Kiev has repeatedly emphasized, the decisive Crimean and Ukrainian forces that will end the conflict are assaulting with all their might. The Kremlin administration and the Russian military are extremely unnerved by the offensive operations in many areas of Crimea. The objective of these operations is to retake Crimea. Kiev is intensifying its offensive operations in Crimea for this purpose. The Kremlin administration and the Russian military are terrified by Kiev's assaults. The fear of the Ukrainian military is causing Russian soldiers to evacuate Crimea, as well as the evacuation of Russian headquarters and military families. The military authorities of Crimea, supported by Russia, declared the evacuation of Russian military families from the peninsula last month. It was a swift action motivated by anxiety and dread. It also indicated that the Russians were unable to withstand Ukrainian attacks. Moreover, the evacuation of Russian headquarters outside of Crimea in recent weeks was a visceral symbol of the Russians' unease. Ukraine's assaults on the Crimean cities of Sevastopol, Simferopol, and the vicinity of the Kerch Bridge were intensive. The Russian soldiers and commanders stationed in Crimea could no longer withstand this duress. Urgent requests for assistance and evacuation were sent to the Kremlin. British intelligence disclosed in this week's update a dire situation for the Russian military in Crimea. According to British intelligence, Sergei Aksyonov, the Russian-backed leader of Crimea, is also concerned about the capacity of the Russian army to defend the peninsula. According to British intelligence, quote, the main component of the Russian garrison, the 22nd Corps, has largely fled outside the peninsula and sustained heavy losses. The preponderance of the fleeing Russian soldiers were members of the 22nd Russian Corps. The 22nd Russian Corps is an element of the coastal defense divisions of the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet. The Corps, which was established in 2017 following the Russian Federation's annexation of Crimea, has its headquarters in Simferopol and commands Crimean-based divisions. Nevertheless, the 22nd Corps, the principal component of the Russian garrison, is now primarily stationed outside the peninsula and has sustained severe losses. The Corps consists of 40,000 personnel in total. The precise number of fatalities among these soldiers is unknown, but it is estimated to exceed 5,000. However, it is estimated that the Kiev attacks caused the deaths of the overwhelming majority of soldiers. It is estimated that approximately 10,000 Russian personnel from the 22nd Corps remained on the Crimean Peninsula, following the evacuation of Russian military bases. In other terms, it appears that approximately 30,000 Russian soldiers retreated. The 22nd Russian Corps is also a paramilitary organization. As is well known, Russia's regular armed forces have experienced a proliferation of paramilitary organizations over the past 2 decades. Since Russia's attempt to invade Ukraine, however, this paramilitarization has accelerated significantly. According to UK Defense Intelligence, the level of paramilitarization on the Crimean Peninsula has reached particularly alarming levels. Sergei Aksyonov, the commander of the Russian occupation administration in temporarily occupied Crimea, played a significant role in establishing a number of local units that frequently claimed affiliation with the Kazakh tradition. The majority of units were designated as reserve units of the regular army. According to UK Defense Intelligence, Sergei Aksyonov, the Russian-backed leader of Crimea, is eager to polish his patriotic identity by recruiting combatants but is likely concerned about the regular army's ability to defend the peninsula. According to the UK Defense Ministry, Aksyonov will enlist more paramilitary groups outside of Russia's official military ranks to bolster Crimea's defense against attacks. In reality, Aksyonov's concerns are not unfounded because Crimea is routinely attacked and the Russian military is unable to stop them. Russia's actions in Crimea do not appear to have brought relief to Crimean authorities and citizens as a result of the assault. The peninsula is being evacuated by evacuations. A Ukrainian official reported that tens of thousands of Russians fled Crimea and abandoned their homes out of fear that Ukraine's anticipated counterattack would target the Black Sea Peninsula. Approximately 500 to 800,000 illegal Russians currently reside in Crimea. Russians may be deported against their will in accordance with Ukrainian law and international law. Concerned about this possibility, Russians are selling their homes and leaving Crimea. The Russian withdrawal from Crimea is also reflected in the housing market. The exact quantity cannot be determined by examining the real estate market, however, many people depart. On the other hand, it was discovered that the Russian administrations in Crimea were preparing employee evacuation plans. The peninsula's Russian authorities are compiling a list of employees and their families subject to priority evacuation. Among the information is the fact that escape plans have already been developed and approved in some cities in the northern portion of the peninsula, close to the Ukrainian mainland in the city of Krasnoperekopsk. It was announced that such a plan was being formulated. It appears that Crimea is becoming a place from which both civilians and combatants wish to flee. While U.S. Army retired General Ben Hodges emphasizes that it's not particularly difficult for Ukraine to retake Crimea, the British Army is transforming 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers into the most elite special operations unit in the world. These 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers trained in the UK will be the spearhead of Ukraine's massive Crimean offensive against Russia. Putin's visit to the occupied portion of Kherson and NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg's visit to Ukraine to check on the forces are indicators that a Ukrainian offensive is imminent. The next phase of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is about to commence. The second round address is quite remarkable. As the weather warms, it appears inevitable that counterattacks will commence and that both parties to the conflict will now focus on the southern front lines. Both armies continue their counterattack preparations. Russia seeks to annex the entire Donbass region, while Ukraine seeks to reclaim the lost territory. However, the Crimean Peninsula, as the key strategic objective, is currently the focus of all attention. The intentions of the Ukrainian forces to seize the peninsula threw the agenda into disarray. Since last summer, Ukraine's unexpected ally has trained a large number of Ukrainian soldiers, thereby facilitating Kiev's main offensive strategy in Crimea. Let's examine this crucial Crimean plan and what Ukraine's unexpected ally did to make it a reality. Tanks sent by the United States, Germany, and the United Kingdom over the past month are anticipated to be effective in Ukraine's counteroffensive. In addition to tanks, it is an undeniable fact that trained soldiers also play an important role in the counterattack during conflict. This is why the United Kingdom trains Ukrainian army personnel. Yes, as previously indicated, the United Kingdom is one of the protagonists in Kiev's remarkable Crimean plan. Since last summer, nearly 60,000 Ukrainian personnel have been trained in the United Kingdom by British forces. In the beginning of this year, however, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak increased the monthly rate from 10 to 20,000. Every 5 weeks, the United Kingdom is preparing 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers for President Volodymyr Zelensky's spring offensive against Russian forces. The British trainers were assisted by trainers from Canada, Denmark, Finland, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Australia, and New Zealand. In 35-day training missions, Ukrainian soldiers are taught a variety of combat skills, including rural and urban warfare and counter-IED survival in a hostile environment. Medical trauma, weapon management, marksmanship, and armed conflict law are among these combat skills. In addition, duty has been assumed in all training areas, including Salisbury Plain, Hankley Common, Longmoor, Catterick, and Otterburn. At Salisbury Plain, British-donated 90 self-propelled artillery is used to teach Ukrainian soldiers how to command artillery and coordinate air attacks. This 155mm mobile artillery system can fire up to 6 projectiles per minute. Therefore, a 90 training is extremely essential after the UK donated thousands of GPMG weapons, sniper rifles, and ammunition. The large area in Wiltshire is also used for armored infantry training, live firing with general-purpose machine guns, and specialist sniper training at Longmoor in Hampshire. Ukrainian soldiers are guided on their routine patrols while at Hankley Common in Surrey. They participate in dawn assaults against simulated Russian positions. In addition, they are taught to fly helicopters, operate drones at night, and engage in close-quarters combat in simulated villages. In Salisbury, the final week-long evaluation of the training of Ukrainian soldiers is taking place. Therefore, how are the attacks that caused Russian soldiers and civilians to evacuate the peninsula? And what methods does Ukraine employ to target Crimea? The Russian supply lines of crucial importance have been the target of the assaults on Crimea as a direct result of these strikes. The supply to Russia has been severely hampered. The Russians' morale suffers as a result of this scenario, and it also deprives them of vital resources. The invasions of Crimea do not solely consist of military operations. In addition, these attacks lead to the breakdown of social relationships and mental weariness. It is only a matter of time before social breakdown is accompanied by revolutions and rebellions. This cannot be avoided. You are aware that Ukrainian drones often attack Russian air bases, especially those located in Crimea. Daily, people from the peninsula leave Crimea for this reason, and the Russian authorities stationed there are unable to find a solution to the problem. Let us now, without further ado, take a look at the most recent events that have taken place on the peninsula, as well as what went down behind the scenes of the most recent attacks on the Russian aviation bases located in Crimea. One of the key goals of the Ukrainian armed forces was to take out the Saki air base, which was located on the Crimean Peninsula. Following this deadly strike, Russian military officials on the peninsula declared that their air defense systems were always alert and ready to respond to any threat. It was found out that the Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicle UAV that was utilized in the attack on the Saki airport had iridium devices installed in it. As a result, the Crimean authorities did not make any comments regarding whether or not this strike resulted in any harm. The authorities' reluctance to provide answers led to an increase in the number of questions at this time. Ukrainian troops have carried out many drone operations in Crimea. These attacks have enabled the Ukrainian army to pinpoint the sites of Russian air defense systems located on the peninsula. It is believed that the Ukrainians will be able to carry out attacks that are substantially more effective once they gain access to this information. Accordingly, it is alleged that the most recent air bombardment by the Ukrainian military on the Saki airbase resulted in damage to the facility. In addition, the fact that Ukrainian forces are aiming their fire towards an airbase such as Saki is a major cause for concern for the Russian government. The assault on Russian military bases on the peninsula, now slated to take place in Crimea by Ukrainian forces, is seen as a strategy to improve the chances of the operation being successful. Because of this, the most strategically important Russian military bases on the peninsula are one of the key focuses of the Ukrainian military's efforts. In order to accomplish these goals, Ukrainian drones have been launching persistent attacks against Russian air bases at Saki and Sevastopol over the course of the previous few months. You may also recall that there were attacks using drones carried out on the airbase located at Gienku. The distance between Gienku and Saki is around 120 kilometers. On the other hand, the Saki airfield can be found to the southwest of Gienku. Compared to other cities, Gienku is located a considerable distance from the Ukrainian border. Saki is fairly close to Yevpatoria. There is around 24 kilometers of distance between the two cities. On the other hand, Russian authorities have stated that these two cities are no longer in danger from attacks launched by the Ukrainian military and that their air defense systems have been improved. After hearing these claims, it became evident that Ukrainian UAVs had targeted and attacked the Saki airbase. The Russian authorities have indicated that the threat has passed in some regions of the peninsula, but the Ukrainian troops are able to continuously surprise them by launching drone assaults on the peninsula. This allows the Ukrainian forces to gain the upper hand in the conflict. In addition, prior to the assaults on the Saki airbase, the Ukrainian forces carried out a strike in the city of Armyansk. The Ukrainians had the intention of establishing an offensive corridor between Crimea and Kherson when they launched their aggressive assault here. Armyansk can be found on the border between Russia and Ukraine. If the Ukrainians are successful in establishing an attack base here, they will be able to direct their missiles onto any and all areas and settlements that are located on the peninsula. Last night, the skies above Crimea were illuminated by drones operated by the Ukrainian government. The entire fleet of drones simultaneously initiated offensive operations in a variety of locations around Crimea. According to officials from the region, Crimea was also the location of an act of sabotage during the past week. It has been stated that the explosives led to the derailment of a train, which in turn led to the suspension of rail operations between Sevastopol and Simferopol, the capital city of Crimea. Because of the explosions, there were a total of 8 grain wagons that became derailed, and a crater 1.5 meters in length and running parallel to the damaged track for 50 meters was produced underneath the tracks, according to a report by the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense that cites intelligence data from Twitter. An explosion on railroad tracks in Crimea caused a disruption in the transportation of supplies and munitions, notably caliber cruise missiles, to the Russian government's Black Sea Fleet. Because of the stoppage in supply, the Russian logistics system suffered substantial harm. The annexation of Crimea by Russia was necessary for Moscow to maintain control over the occupied territories in southern and eastern Ukraine and to ensure that Russian troops were adequately supplied, according to those with expertise in the military. Attacks on Russian infrastructure disrupt Russian military preparations and make it impossible for Moscow to prepare for the anticipated response by the Ukrainians as a result of its failure to sustain offensive operations. Russia is making efforts to strengthen its fortifications on the Crimean Peninsula. The beaches of Crimea were formerly popular vacation destinations at this time. The shoreline, which is around 25 kilometers in length, is lined not with sun loungers and umbrellas, but rather with fortifications that were constructed by Russian forces. The teeth of the dragon are constructed out of pyramid-shaped concrete blocks and are placed along the coast to restrict the movement of tanks and other military vehicles. A series of shields, each one crafted to stave off an oncoming assault, can be found hiding between the dragon's teeth. In addition, there are many shelters scattered along the trenches. Ukraine also possesses a huge ace up its sleeve to play against Russia's moves. The mighty Western tanks that belong to Kiev constitute this ace in the hole. These dragon teeth are vulnerable to being destroyed by Western tanks due to their location. In addition, there are experts in the military who claim that the defenses are merely precautionary measures, given Ukraine's inadequate naval capabilities. As a result of the statement made by the government of the United States that it was possible for American weapons to be directed towards Crimea, Ukraine now has more options for striking the peninsula. Even at this moment, the GLSDB missiles used by the Ukrainian forces are capable of reaching Yevpatoria. The effective range of GLSDB missiles is somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 kilometers. It is estimated that the GLSDB missiles employed by the Ukrainian military have a range of more than 150 kilometers when equipped with additional ammo options. However, if the Ukrainian troops are successful in establishing an offensive base in Armyansk, even HIMARS will be able to take control of a significant number of the Crimean cities that are within its line of sight. In addition to the Ukrainian armed forces and Ukrainian partisan organizations, Crimean Tatars and other ethnic groups are making substantial contributions to the battle to free the peninsula. Bakhchisarai, which is located in Crimea, was the target of a catastrophic attack that was undertaken by an organization of Ukrainian resistance that had its roots in Crimean Tatar culture as a direct result of the attacks carried out by the Crimean resistance movement. This railway line, which is located around 15 kilometers away from the Simferopol station, was blown up. According to reports in Russian media, 3 trains were affected by the attacks carried out by the Ukrainian opposition group. One traveling from Sevastopol to St. Petersburg, carrying 166 passengers. Another serving the suburbs of St. Petersburg, and the third serving the suburbs of Sevastopol. At the same time, individuals affiliated with the Ukrainian resistance organization confirmed that this railway in Crimea had been destroyed. The whole truth was revealed in the essay that members of the Ukrainian resistance movement, who were responsible for the explosives in Bakhchisarai, uploaded on social media. It was mentioned in a post that was seen by millions of users that a piece of the railway line that was located near the occupied settlement of Poshtova in Simferopol was efficiently removed. This post received a lot of attention. Additionally, the remark, made in the same post, made it abundantly clear that when the train stopped, nobody was going anywhere. In addition, an explosion took place the other day in the village of Perevaln, which is located in Crimea and is near Simferopol. Media outlets in Ukraine and the Crimean Tatar Republic both reported hearing about the explosion. It is common knowledge that a Russian military installation can be found in this location. More specifically, this location is home to the 126th Coast Defense Brigade of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. An explosion took place at the same time as the bombing by the Ukrainian military against the base of the 126th Coast Guard Brigade. Following the detonation, numerous parts of the city were able to observe the creation of gigantic clouds. The Russian government did not publish an official statement addressing the casualties caused by the explosion at the base, which was caused by the Russian government. The haze that surrounded the event continues to be present. According to reports, Grom, 2 missiles attacked the outpost that was manned by the 126th Coast Defense Brigade. On the other hand, there has not yet been any formal declaration published regarding this matter. According to reports made by Ukrainian news outlets, members of this brigade take part in Russian offensive operations in the area surrounding Kherson. In addition to the explosions that occurred in the village of Perevaln, the Ukrainian assaults caused tremors to be felt throughout a number of other areas in Crimea. The bombing of the trains that were carrying Russian-caliber cruise missiles skyrocketed to the top of the agenda, especially in Gyeongui. It is not possible to state with certainty that the ammunition has been removed from the premises. In spite of this, Russia has begun looking into a recent drone strike that was thwarted by Russian air defense systems near the city of Gyeonggi, which is one of the primary locations for the transfer of Russian material in Crimea. The attack was carried out near the city. According to Ukraine's statement, the strike was carried out with the intention of disarming Russia and getting it ready to leave the Crimean Peninsula 2 days after the explosion at Gyeonggi. Air defense systems began to light up the night sky over Sevastopol, which is the home of the Black Sea Navy. A video taken from within the port area was shown to have captured a tremendous explosion on camera. Drones that were both seaborne and airborne were used to attack Sevastopol. Even though it is located 225 kilometers away from the battle lines, the multi-area offensive is evidence that Ukraine still has the capability to threaten Sevastopol. The governor of the city has stated that an attack by seaplane has been prevented. The Crimean Peninsula was surrounded by Ukrainian forces from virtually every direction. The Russians stationed on the peninsula were unable to thwart the UAV strikes launched by the Ukrainians or put an end to the uprisings staged by the peninsula's residents. The liberation movement that originated in Crimea spread to adjacent territories after its initial success there. The Ukrainians' effort to recover control of Crimea included a number of different objectives, one of which was the island of Kinburn. It made perfect sense to recapture this tiny piece of land, considering its position and the history of the surrounding area. The sandy Kinburn Spit is located at the tip of a peninsula that is 40 kilometers long and can be anywhere from 4 to 12 kilometers broad. Kinburn controls the access point to the Dnipro River system, which empties into the Black Sea and divides Kiev and the remainder of northern Ukraine from the rest of the country. Kinburn also dominates the entry to the Dnipro River system. In addition, this region is responsible for regulating access from the Black Sea to the important port of Mykolaiv in Ukraine. The strategic significance of this peninsula is increased by the fact that the port of Mykolaiv is one of the ports that are now available to Ukraine. Because of this, those who control this relatively flat stretch of land, which serves as an alternate departure point for Ukraine's exports, also have the ability to use force to invade the territory to the south and east of the Black Sea. The Ukrainians launched a crushing assault against Kinburn, which was their major aim as part of the war to recover Crimea. This was the Ukrainians' principal target. A fierce artillery engagement broke out on the Kinburn Spit as a result of the Ukrainian armed forces' successful encirclement of the Russian forces there at Kinburn Spit. As a result of prolonged fighting, Ukrainian artillery and missile troops were successful in destroying a Russian artillery cannon and, more significantly, a Russian multiple-launch rocket system. In this remarkable operation that took place on Kinburn Spit, Ukrainian artillery was also responsible for destroying a Russian ammo storage complex. While this devastating artillery bombardment, which stimulated the Dnipro Islands region, intensified the encirclement of the Russian forces in Kinburn, their most crucial Black Sea connecting lines came dangerously close to being cut off as a direct consequence of the accurate fire of the Ukrainian artillery. The Russians were no longer able to hold on to this section of the island after suffering the loss of their MLR, as well as a significant amount of other types of military munitions. In addition, Navy operatives from Ukraine were providing support for the artillery action that was taking place at the same time. Even as we speak, highly trained Ukrainian Naval Special Operations personnel are conducting reconnaissance and detection patrols on Kinburn Spit and other parts of the Dnipro Islands. If Ukraine is successful in establishing a footing on this flat strategic shore at Kinburn and constructing a headland from which it can move up the peninsula, then it will have taken another step in its unrelenting advance towards the Crimean Peninsula. Regarding this matter, Russia has no idea what action will be taken by Ukraine as a consequence of this. Tensions will grow around the ring of fire that encircles this peninsula, and the Ukrainians will be able to launch a significant offensive if the Russians do not make preparations to protect themselves against a range of potential threats. On the other side, the Russian Navy was in for an unwelcome surprise at the port of Berdyansk, which is located around 400 kilometers from the Crimean Peninsula. In addition to successfully executing missile attacks against the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet and Russian naval aviation, both of which are based in Russian-occupied Crimea, Ukraine has demonstrated on multiple occasions that it is capable of striking Russian ships that are docked in the port. The landing craft, Saratov, which was located in Berdyansk, was sunk in March of the previous year by a missile fired from Ukraine. Despite this, the authorities in the Kremlin denied for a considerable amount of time that the Saratov had sunk. The Kremlin's denials were rendered worthless as a result of the photographs that were released on social media by the head of the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. After the recent confession of a Russian admiral, Valery Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, recently published a video on his Telegram channel in which he revealed that the ship was sunk in the port of the city of Berdyansk in the Zaporizhia Oblast 1 year ago on March 24, 2022. This information was included in the video, according to the post that was posted. Multiple ships, including the Orsk, the Caesar Kunikov, and the Novocherkassk, sustained damage. The severe losses sustained by the Russian Navy are now officially recognized as having occurred during the assault on all 4 landing vessels. A total of approximately a dozen regular sailors, in addition to an unknown number of elite sailors, were killed on the first anniversary of the ship's sinking. Felix Menkov, the commander of the Crimean naval base at Sevastopol, who had been appointed by Russia, unveiled a plaque in memory of the lost seamen. Menkov was appointed on the same day that Russia announced the ship's sinking on a memorial. The names of the 12 Russian soldiers who lost their lives during the attack are listed. The answer to the question of whether or not this is an integer is left up for debate. The truth came to light little by little as a direct result of the attacks launched by Ukraine. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in February, the Black Sea Fleet's vulnerabilities, which were designed to portray Russian naval control over the eastern Mediterranean and the former Soviet Union, have been ruthlessly exposed. The Black Sea Fleet was built to show Russian naval dominance over the former Soviet Union. The notion that the Russian Navy was invulnerable was brought crashing down by the well-targeted attacks carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces. This once again exhibited an indisputable reality that cannot be refuted. There will be no break in the action for Russian forces on land or at sea, thanks to the Ukrainian military. The worry that Ukraine would lose control of Crimea had a big bearing on the way things were going on the other front lines in Ukraine. In order to avoid the loss of land that Russia now holds, Russia has placed its own air defense systems on the southern front lines of Ukraine's territory that front the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimea. The removal of the vast ball-K of air defense systems from places such as Kherson, Melitopol, and Zaporizhia by the Russian government has made these regions susceptible to attack. On the other hand, these 3 areas are considered to be the entry points to Crimea. The Russians are fully aware of the situation that now exists. The fact that the Ukrainian armed forces have access to a landing route that spans 230 kilometers and connects Melitopol and the Crimean Peninsula is a big advantage for them. As a result of Russia removing its air defense equipment from these locations, the Ukrainians will have a tremendous advantage, and their chances of advancing towards Crimea will greatly rise. On the other side, Russian media sites have pointed out that this is the first official confirmation that the ship was lost in combat. This comes despite claims of ships being struck by Ukrainian missiles being denied for a whole year by the Ukrainian government. Without a shadow of a doubt, Russia has experienced huge losses in the Black Sea. In particular, the fact that the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva, ran aground in April 2022 and that 4 ships, one of which was the Saratov, were rendered inoperable, is evidence of the losses suffered by the Russian Navy. As a direct consequence of this, Russia sustained substantial casualties, both on the front lines in Ukraine and on the peninsula in the Black Sea. In the next few days, we will be watching Vladimir Putin, who has lost control both on land and water, to see what moves he makes. The status of Crimea will determine the outcome of the crisis in Ukraine. The Ukrainian administration is well aware of the fact that Russia will never be content with Crimea remaining in its hands. In the next few months, Ukraine will lay the groundwork for the ultimate liberation of Crimea by creating the necessary conditions. Melitopol and Mariupol, 2 cities in southern Ukraine that are occupied by Russia, serve as a land link between Russia's border and the Crimean Peninsula. Russia also occupies Crimea, in addition to a substantial chunk of the southern region of Ukraine. The Russian military relies heavily on this area as a significant supply route. Crimea, which was conquered by the Russian Empire in 1783 under Catherine the Great, is also of immense symbolic value for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who relates Russia's conflict in Ukraine to his imperial past. Putin ties Crimea's symbolic significance to the fact that he links Russia's war in Ukraine to his imperial past. In one of his speeches, Putin referred to the Crimean Peninsula as Russia's sacred land. The illegal takeover of Crimea by Putin in 2014 paved the way for the larger invasion war that he started the following year. The battle to regain control of Crimea can be a difficult one in the context of this war, which has already caused catastrophic casualties on both sides. The Chief of Staff of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, is of the opinion that negotiations are necessary in order to bring an end to the war. However, there are military experts who feel that the retaking of Crimea is essential to Ukraine's long-term survival and who state that Ukrainian troops have proven their capability of accomplishing this mission. These experts believe that Crimea must be retaken in order for Ukraine to survive in the long term, as long as the Kremlin maintains authority over the peninsula. It will be impossible for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people to avoid Russian attacks. It is now abundantly clear that Ukraine has the power to retake control of Crimea after months of military victories and successful operations against the peninsula. As a result, Ukraine ought to formulate a plan to free the peninsula with aid from the West. Encircling the Russian forces will not be difficult for the Ukrainian army, which has received assistance from the West. This will be true for both the operations in Crimea and the front lines. It would appear that the crisis in Ukraine will continue, and Crimea will continue to be at one end of the battle. We will be watching to see how an assault by Kiev forces in the south of Ukraine, particularly in Crimea, will affect the trajectory.
Si no puedes aportar económicamente al canal, suscríbete, comenta y comparte, esto ayudará mucho a seguir informando.